The story of life on land begins not with dinosaurs or mammals, but with creatures so strange, they seem like mistakes in nature's design. An army of evolutionary experiments crawling out of primeval waters onto the empty shores of a newborn world. Hundreds of millions of years before the first trees shaded the continents, before wings sliced the air or claws struck the ground, the earth was silent except for the murmur of the wind and the hiss of the tides. The oceans were alive, filled with trilobites, armored fish, and tentacled hunters, but the land was barren. It was a blank canvas waiting to be tested, and life was about to take its first uncertain steps upon it. In the late Silurian period, around 430 million years ago, the boundaries between sea and land began to blur. The shorelines were coated with mats of green algae and the earliest moss-like plants, forming slick, oxygen-rich films that clung to wet rock. Tides flooded these coastal flats and withdrew, over and over again, leaving behind shallow pools where marine animals found themselves stranded. In these pools, survival depended on patience and adaptation. Creatures that could tolerate air for longer, even just minutes, had a chance to live where others perished. Evolution had found a new direction. Lungs were being born. The first adventurers onto this unfamiliar frontier were not reptiles or amphibians, but arthropods, creatures with hard shells and jointed legs. Millipede-like animals left faint trails across damp mud, their footprints preserved as fossils in Scotland's ancient rocks. Alongside them scuttled the mighty eurypterids, the so-called sea scorpions, some longer than a man. With armor-plated bodies and powerful claws, they were the early tyrants of shallow waters. Some species likely crawled ashore to hunt or molt, using their limbs to push through the heavy air. Each movement was an evolutionary experiment, a rehearsal for land life that would shape the path of all creatures to come. As the Devonian period dawned, around 400 million years ago, these experiments multiplied. Fish evolved lungs from swim bladders. Fins grew stronger, jointed, and muscular, transforming into crude limbs. Mudskipper-like ancestors began to use their fins to prop themselves up in shallow water, gulping air when oxygen ran low. In the ancient swamps of what is now Greenland and Canada, fossils like Tiktaalik capture this exact moment, a creature half fish, half amphibian, with both gills and lungs, scales and wrist bones. Its body was built for two worlds, able to swim in rivers yet lift itself on muddy banks to hunt in new terrain. The world it entered was unlike any we know. The Devonian landscape was primitive low ferns, mosses, and fungi growing on bare rock, the air thick with carbon dioxide. Rivers meandered through swampy plains beneath red skies dusted with volcanic haze. On the banks, giant insects and arthropods roamed freely, evolving without predators. Tiktaalik times and its relatives entered this alien realm as pioneers. Each breath of air was a struggle. Each step was an experiment. Evolution was improvising in real time. Over millions of years, the descendants of these fish became the first true amphibians. Some, like Ichthyostega and Acanthostega*, still had tails for swimming and gills for breathing underwater, yet their skeletons bore the unmistakable marks of weight-bearing limbs. Fossils show strong shoulder girdles and digits, primitive fingers that could press against the ground. They moved awkwardly, dragging their bellies across mud, but they were no longer bound to the sea. They were the first vertebrates to walk on land. The moment they emerged marked a turning point in Earth's history. Life had conquered the continents. But success came with risk. On land, the rules of survival were rewritten. Gravity pressed harder, water was scarce, sunlight baked delicate skin. To live here meant transforming the very machinery of the body. Lungs had to grow stronger, skin had to seal in moisture, eggs had to resist drying out. Evolution responded with invention after invention, some wondrous, some disastrous. The early Carboniferous period became a laboratory of forms. Amphibians grew to monstrous size, prowling through lush coal forests where oxygen levels were twice what they are today. Some species, like Ariops*, stretched nearly 2 meters long, with sprawling limbs and enormous jaws filled with fangs. Others evolved armor or bizarre skull shapes that defied logic. These were the world's first land monsters, not dinosaurs, but creatures born from the swamps of transition. Fossil footprints show them wandering riverbanks and hunting among tree ferns. Their bodies reveal the tension of change, neither fully aquatic nor fully terrestrial, caught between past and future. Nature was testing blueprints, rewriting anatomy, and discarding what didn't work. Some lineages vanished entirely. Others gave rise to new possibilities. Among those survivors were the ancestors of all future land vertebrates. Small, agile amphibians split into two paths, one that would lead to modern amphibians, and another that would evolve into reptiles, birds, and mammals. Around 310 million years ago, one remarkable adaptation changed everything: the amniotic egg. It allowed life to reproduce away from water, shielding the embryo inside its own private ocean. This was the key that unlocked the full conquest of land. The first reptiles appeared, their dry scales protecting them from desiccation, their lungs efficient, their eggs self-contained. The age of amphibian dominance was over, yet their legacy endured. Every lizard, every bird, every human carries in their skeletons the echoes of that first experiment. The jointed limbs, the flexible neck, the lungs adapted for air, the fingerprints of those early monsters are literally in our bones. When we walk, we are reenacting the same motion times Tiktaalik times once made in a Devonian river 375 million years ago. Our own hands are distant cousins of its fins. The fossils that tell this story are extraordinary. In the Canadian Arctic, Tiktaalik times was discovered embedded in rock layers that once lay along a Devonian floodplain. Its broad, flattened skull and ribcage hint at an animal that could raise its head above water to breathe air. In Greenland, the fossilized skeletons of Ichthyostega times show limbs strong enough to bear weight, with overlapping ribs forming a primitive chest, perhaps the first to truly protect internal organs against gravity. Elsewhere, in Poland, scientists found fossilized trackways made before any known amphibian body fossil existed, suggesting that vertebrates were exploring land even earlier than we thought. Each discovery pushes the timeline of terrestrial life further back, rewriting the narrative of evolution step by step. Even plants were evolving in parallel. As vertebrates experimented with limbs and lungs, forests of giant ferns and horsetails took root. Their roots stabilized soil. Their fallen trunks formed the first organic layers that would one day become coal. The carbon they captured changed the air itself, creating oxygen-rich conditions that allowed animals to grow larger than ever before. Dragonflies the size of hawks, millipedes as long as cars, and amphibians with skulls like crocodiles filled these steaming jungles. The Earth had entered a golden age of life and chaos, a planet ruled by giants in constant transformation. Yet these triumphs were fragile. Evolution's experiments often ended in disaster. The late Devonian extinction wiped out most of the pioneering fish and early amphibians, leaving only a handful of survivors to rebuild. Entire lineages disappeared without descendants. But extinction is never truly an ending. It is a reset, a clearing of the board for what comes next. The survivors carried their hard-won adaptations forward, each generation refining what worked and abandoning what didn't. From their resilience came the template for all future land animals. To study these fossils is to witness evolution's workshop, a place of trial, failure, and brilliance. Paleontologists reading the rock record find not perfection but persistence. They see fins turning into fingers, scales turning into skin, gills turning into lungs. Every fossil is a photograph of change and progress, and together they form the most ambitious story ever written: how life learned to walk. But perhaps the most haunting lesson from this ancient saga is that the Earth remembers everything. The rock formations of the Devonian and Carboniferous still bear the ripples of rivers that once flowed through primeval forests. The imprints of amphibian feet still mark the stones where they dragged themselves forward in search of air. The chemistry of those rocks still carries the fingerprints of the atmosphere they breathed. These are not relics. They are the living memory of transformation. If you stand today on the edge of a quiet river at dusk and watch fish flicker beneath the surface, you are seeing the same struggle replayed. Every breath they take, every ripple they make, carries an echo of that first step onto land. The amphibians croaking in the reeds are the living descendants of those Devonian pioneers. They remind us that we are not separate from this story. We are its continuation. The first monsters on land were not designed to rule forever. They were nature's prototypes, sculpted by time, refined by failure, erased and remade. They crawled where no creature had crawled, breathed air for the first time, and opened a door that has never closed. Without their experiments, there would be no mammals, no birds, no humans to wonder at the fossils left behind. The rocks tell us that the history of life is not a march toward perfection, but a series of creative accidents. The earliest creatures that left the sea were not majestic, they were awkward, gasping, and half-formed. Yet their courage, written into bone and stone, changed the planet forever. They turned barren continents into ecosystems, silence into sound, water into land. When we look at those fossils today, the fins becoming limbs, the tracks pressed into ancient mud, we are looking at the moment life discovered ambition. The moment when evolution, tired of the sea, decided to climb out and see what else was possible. Every living thing that walks, crawls, or flies owes its existence to that single act of defiance against the ocean. The first monsters on land did not just conquer a new world, they created it.